Thank you very much. Alan, will you continue to click through my slides? It's just, yeah, thanks. Thank you. So this is the bit about the assurance scheme. I use the word assurance interchangeably with conformity assessment. So you'll hear us talking about our conformity assessment scheme and our assurance scheme. It's the same thing. Assurance is a broad word. Conformity assessment is a bit clunkier, but it's the technical concept. And so if you take us to the next slide, Alan, this is a description just for context of how Smart Freight Center has moved to this step of the conformity assessment scheme. So as Alan has explained in detail, we've developed the GLEC framework, which then served as a basis for the ISO 14083. And that was a move and an effort into standardization. And standardization is often one of the first things that industries or sectors or stakeholders go for to bring reliability and comparability of any kind of effort, be it reporting, accounting, whatever. So we invested work in standardization. Once the standard is out, we also did, as Catherine was referring to, what we still call accreditation of tools. So evaluating calculation tools to check that they are conforming, they're doing the calculation according to the GLEC framework. And we still have this service. This service we will revise and improve. It might change the name, but in essence, it will remain the same, an evaluation of tools. As Catherine was also saying, it will evolve into evaluating it against the ISO 14083 instead of GLEC. And you will probably, those of you that are members will hear more about that later. And this brings us to the third step, and the one that I'm directly involved here in Smart Freight Center. So I'm with this team from January this year to implement an assurance scheme. Now, we talked a bit about what we wanted to do in this space, because we have we've done something quite unusual, which is transform a standard which was a proprietary standard, although it was shared widely, but the GLEC was sort of transformed into an ISO standard. And in this way, Smart Freight Center lost control over the standard. Of course, we're still very proud to be involved and contribute to updates, but it has its own life within the world of ISO. But we did want to keep involved in this space. And so what is our assurance scheme about, actually? Because those of you who do want to be verified against this amazing standard can do so anyway, and you don't need to be part of our scheme. But what our scheme does is, number one, it gives you information about the verification bodies that are really competent in the transport sector. So there are many verification bodies out there, many kinds of verification standards that are used. So the standard that emission reporters are complying with is the ISO 14083. But the standards that a verifier will use to check you against this standard can vary. Although, of course, they have similarities, some are stronger than others. We at Smart Freight Center believe in the importance of assurance, of not only disclosing, but also verifying the emissions. And so what we've done is we've set up the scheme, which will include a check of verification bodies and ensuring that they are, besides what they usually do, which is doing verification of greenhouse gas emissions, that they are in fact competent in the transport sector, which is what we are knowledgeable about and the kind of competence that we will share with them. So Alan, the next slide, please. Our scheme has built then, there's roles for three bodies, let's say. So Smart Freight Center, we are defining the assurance framework. It has a moment in which verification bodies applied for our approval, and then if we evaluate them, and if they are approved by us, they need to take our mandatory training, which is a training on the ISO 14083, and there's an exam associated to that. So the aim of this step is to ensure a level playing field and really good competence of whoever is turning up at your door to verify your accounting. And so we provide mandatory training to VVBs and an exam, and then if they do pass the exam, then they will be listed on a list of approved verification bodies. So this is something that you can use when you're choosing your verification bodies to evaluate your values, to choose someone from our list. You can choose, of course, whoever you want, but this gives you an extra confidence that the people who will visit you are really good at what they're saying, and specifically for the transport sector. So what do these verification bodies need to do? They need to obviously apply for our approval, and this is all described in our website. I'm not going to bore you with that. When they do come to check you, if they are part of our scheme, they will be complying with the ISO standards for verification. As I said, there are many standards. We consider these are the strongest ones, the ISO standards, and they are specifically called 17029. It's relatively recent. Some verification bodies have not yet been accredited according to them, but they are 17029, 14065, and 14063/3. These are the standards that any verification body will have to comply with if they are accredited by a national accreditation body. So in each country, there will be one accreditation body, and that accreditation body will evaluate that organization to check if they are competent and impartial. We are not going to redo that work. We are firm believers in the accreditation work and national accreditation bodies, so we will not reinvent the wheel. We will build on top of that. So we will accept those who have been accredited by their national accreditation bodies. I can tell you that it is a subset of those who offer verification services. And then they take our training, and that's it. That's ongoing. And then the third role is for people, organizations, well, for all of us almost, for the reporters of greenhouse gas emissions. So those organizations will calculate emissions. They will comply with 14083. And we have built an extra thing that ISO 14083 does not have, which is performance levels. And what are these? We believe that these are focusing on areas that we think still need more work. And maybe, Alan, you can show us the next slide. And these are the levels. So we've built the basic level is level 1 is basic compliance with 14083. So if you're already complying, for example, with GLEC version 2, then you're probably just a step away from complying with 14083, and that would correspond to the first level of performance of our scheme. But if you're already there, then maybe you want to look at the second and third level, and those are obviously optional. But if you think you're there, then maybe you would like your verification bodies to check this for you and to issue you a statement in which they confirm that you are indeed on level 2 or 3. And how do we determine these levels? So we've chosen some criteria. One of them is the level of assurance that you've chosen for your verification service. The other one is the materiality of errors, so the quantity of errors that are still accepted for that engagement. The other one is, do you have public reporting? Because obviously you can ask for verification, but then not publicly share the values that you've had verified. It can be for internal consumption only, right? So if you do public reporting of the overall emissions, then you're on level 2. If you do it for the whole data template that we provide, then you would be on level 3. And then we have also cutoffs. So we would accept 5% cutoffs for level 2 and 2% for level 3. And then finally, data quality. So this was probably what Catherine was mentioning. We believe that data quality is now something we all need to work on. And so we have this last criteria, which is about what is the percent of primary data that you have for your own fleet, and what is the percent of default data that you have for the subcontracted fleet. So based on these two aspects, you will be allocated as being on level 2 or 3 if you want to. And Alan, maybe you can show the last slide. This is quite a busy slide. I'm just maybe whetting your appetite or showing you that there is some detail to it. So there are some thresholds in there. So all of this is on our website if you're interested in going for it. And within a couple of months, you're probably going to be busy calculating these values. So if you're curious about what level you might be on, then please do check out our website. You'll find these levels in what we call the Mission Reporters Manual, which explain our scheme. But basically, in a nutshell, it consists of a scheme in which you are provided with a list of approved verification bodies for your use, and also you can apply for different levels and as a remissions reporter. We have produced some templates. So, for example, we've got a template for emissions reports for you. We have also got a template for a verifier report and a template for a checklist. They're not mandatory, but we've put them out there for people to use, and they're of course all aligned with ISO 14083. And I think that takes us to the last slide, which is the Mentimeter one, which I would just ask you to, it's just some 4 or 5 questions. We're curious as to your experience with verification bodies. And so if you want to, while we're chatting and eventually having some questions answered, you can have a look at these questions and reply to them, and then we'll come back to them in a while. Okay, so what do we have? I see one question regarding level of assurance, limited or reasonable. So this has to do with the engagement that you will contract from your verifier. So let's say you contract your verifier to come and ensure the value that you've calculated for 2022, let's say, or 2023. So this is something that is not mentioned in the 14083, but all verification engagements, they will ask you, what level of assurance do you want? Do you want limited or reasonable? There's also an alternative level, which is relatively new, which is called agreed upon procedures. And these levels show an increase of time that the verifiers spend on you, and so an increased level of trust that people can have in their work. So the sentence that they will say, you might want to look at some sustainability reports, your own or maybe others that you know, and the sentence that a verifier will state on their statement about the values that they have checked will vary according to limited or reasonable level of assurance. And agreed upon procedures, there will be actually no statement, but there will be some kind of information. Let's say it's the most basic check, but the verifier will not really have a lot of confidence given they have limited time, and so they cannot provide such an extensive statement, such a confidence-based statement on the value. So it's got to do with time, thus of course money. So if you want reasonable assurance, then it will cost more than limited, and limited will cost more than agreed upon procedures. And this is something that the verifier will ask you straight up when you ask for a quote. Regarding cutoff, what if a verified company does not own a fleet? Yeah, we discussed this. This is yeah, of course, it's a call. This is what we've decided for this this phase in our system, and we accept that it's debatable, but we've decided. And of course, there's the whole thing of aggregating and having cases that may not fit everyone, but for now this is the level that we've but we're happy to take suggestions and to hear your opinions, of course. So someone says our scope 3 data has limited assurance by our auditors. Would this yeah, so that's a good question, actually. So if you already have some scope, some of the data that you get from your suppliers already comes with assurance, then this is definitely something that you should bring up with your own verifiers to say, hey, this data has been assured by someone else, maybe even by the same organization. How will this be considered in the quote that you have for us? I think this is all, I think maybe something that we might have for those of you that are just starting with verification is to really invest time in defining the scope of the service. So it's not something like off the shelf kind of thing. So it's really worthwhile for you to talk to your provider or to the several people you might want to ask a quote for, and to explain what data you have and things like this. Do you have assured data? Are you using an accredited tool, accredited by Smart Grid Center? There is some variation. It depends on the practices of each organization. So I cannot speak for them, but for sure they will need to consider that, and they might take that into account and decrease, of course, the money that you pay for it. I would think that's a reasonable request, at least. Cutoffs. Alan, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that's also something that comes into the ISO.
Honestly, not particularly, because I think you probably know them better than me from your assurance experience.
Let me just pull up where we have this described so that I'm reading from somewhere that is clear. So if you're curious, this is all on our website, as I said, the manual, and this includes the table, which has quite a lot of information there. So the cutoffs, I'm trying to see where, it's note 3. Cutoffs are something that have to do with what is not considered in a calculation. And so there is some acceptance of things that can be considered to be outside of scope, and so would not be considered to be within the calculation, and so it could be left out and not calculated. And this is again something that a verification body will talk to you about. It has to do with the scope. So it's got to do with this defined scope of your report. Some people call it de minimis exclusions. So maybe you might have heard it that way. So they are a proportion of the data that can be excluded from the defined scope of the report. And they can be agreed to cover small emission sources that should eventually be within the defined scope, but are considered to be, let's say, not important, so ignorable, like not important enough. So they are allowed by 14083. There's a clause. Oh yes, this is the clause I was looking for. So clause 523 of 14083 allows cutoffs, but they have no threshold. So this is the reason why we've said if you're complying with level 1, then you're complying with ISO, right? And if ISO doesn't have a threshold, then that's fine. So there's no threshold. You can leave out what you've agreed with your verifier. But for level 2 and 3, we decided to go with the values that are used by SBTI. So that's why we have these 2 and 5% values. That's the reason why we chose them. Let me see if I can see other last question. What about assurance providers that are not accredited? Yeah, exactly. This is a good question. So we are really championing the assurance providers that are accredited by a national accreditation body. But of course, there are other organizations that are not accredited by national verification bodies. And for those, we will have, of course, we will have training. We can give training to whoever turns up to our training, but they will not be able to be on our list of approved verification bodies. That's the whole point of us just having, I mean, maybe they are excellent. I'm not saying they're not, but our criteria was being accredited by national accreditation bodies against the ISO standard. There you go. And then there's a question about, is there a data standard for exchanging logistics emissions data?
I was just wanting to pick up on that one as well, and maybe I can do that now verbally and put the link to our end-to-end guidance into the chat, because we also have kind of like an annex and attachment to our GLAC framework, which is giving some guidance around how data exchange can be done. And there is also guidance on a data model, data semantics, and we're also having a running project on that, data and digitalization, and how that could look like. Quite an interesting yet challenging topic, but I can just share for the moment the link to the existing guidance that we have published. So maybe that is helpful at this point.
Thank you, Catherine and Alan, in any case already. I don't know, and do you want to go back to the Mentimeter responses? Do you still want to zoom in
I
on them?
do. I'm trying
Yeah,
to find, let me see here where it is.
we have 10 minutes left, so that's, I think that
Yeah.
should give us enough room to talk about that. Um, In any case, if there would be any open questions or if you would wake up tomorrow morning and find yourself with an urgent question on this webinar after a good night's sleep, feel free to send them to us, to Pablo, to Catherine, and we'll make sure it lands with the right people to provide you with a good question. Also think the recording
Okay.
and the presentation will be available for you pretty soon. So yeah, and
Let me
go
see
ahead.
if I can present this. Present. Now, maybe I need to first share my screen.
Now you should be
Do
able to
that.
listen.
Here we go. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, has your organization worked with verification bodies before? And we've got more than half saying, of those that are responding, saying, yes, this is good for us to know. Thank you. This is always interesting to know that you have experience. And we're always interested in knowing what your experience has actually been like. Just a note, we will keep this Mentimeter open for some days. So if you're not wanting to do this now, but if you want to submit information later, you can still use it with this code. If you take a picture of it, then it will still be open. And then next one, if you have done it, so for those 18 of you that have done it, what do you think of their competence? Some of you, most of you don't know enough about this, maybe because you haven't been the person looking at it, or maybe because you are not sure that you know enough about what a verification body should be doing. But some of you are actually quite happy with them, or very happy with them. But there's a few that are insufficient or sufficient. Exactly. So this is the reason why we're trying to give them some training. And hopefully, if we take this again, which is my aim to continue asking these questions, hopefully for those of you who have used an approved VVB by us, our aim is to reduce these insufficiencies. It's not nice when you're audited by someone who doesn't know enough and whom you feel does not have a grasp on what you're doing. So if you haven't yet, those of you who have not yet worked with verification bodies, then we don't know enough about the service, so you don't know enough about what verification actually is, or you haven't actually calculated, which is also a very reasonable reason for not to have engaged someone to verify the calculations. And then here comes a common question answer too. We don't see any client interest. Too expensive. Yeah, we've got sometimes this answer, and not yet important enough to spend time on it. So yeah, hopefully it will change over time, I think. And yeah, we love to see the answer to this. So how important is it to engage someone that has had our training? Good to see that you value our training. That's what we're aiming for. And the last one, are you ready to apply for our scheme? Like, would you already have some value to submit to us? And a big part doesn't know, but yeah, some of you could still do it this year. Great to know. And I look forward to seeing them. There's more information on our website. There's also a possibility to have a one-to-one call with us. So yeah, I'm very excited about being able to look at your accounting with the company of professionals who do it as a job, the verification bodies and the verifiers. So I'm really enthusiastic about that. Any other questions? We've got a couple of minutes. I don't know if anyone else wants to go from the rest of the team, Alan, Catherine, Pablo.
I don't
Well, I
see.
also tried my best to answer some of the questions directly in the chat with the people. So I think we have the majority covered, though there might be some that have slipped through. So bear with us to catch up on those or raise them again, maybe via email.